Hi, I'm Jackie with Military Saves, and thank you so much for joining us in our final week of Military Saves Month. This week's theme is Save as a Family, and we're very excited about today's Midday Money Chat. Now, before I introduce our guest, I want to remind you of two different opportunities. One, during the live, please post your favorite takeaway in the comments below for a chance to win a $50 gift card of your choice from Military Families Magazine. And the second is a reminder to enter our $500 I'm Saving For sweepstakes. There's 3 steps to do that. I've posted them in the chat above, so good luck with those. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So first off, I'm going to introduce Jen Davis. She is the Government Relations Deputy Director at the National Military Family Association. She is responsible for programs relating to spouse employment and education, financial literacy, and food insecurity. Prior to joining the association, Jen served in various roles at the Air Force Sergeants Association, including Director of Military and Government Relations. Jen also served in the United States Air Force as an imagery analyst at the U.S. Strategic Command. Over the last 19 years as a service member and spouse, Jen has lived in Texas, Nebraska, Hawaii, Florida, and Virginia. Jen, thank you for your service, but also thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
All right, and next up is Amelia O'Rourke Owens. She is the Associate Director at America Saves. And in this role, Amelia explores innovative ways to improve financial outcomes for youth, and she also manages America Saves for Young Workers. That's a campaign that encourages young Americans to utilize direct deposit in order to save, build wealth, and reduce debt. Amelia coordinates partner cities' participation in their young workers' savings effort and advocates for practices that build and protect the youth's personal wealth. So, Amelia, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So today we're discussing Save as a Family. And before we start, I want everyone to think for a moment about your childhood and what you were taught about money, if anything at all. Some families, it's a taboo topic, and others, it's a bad thing, like only the greedy want money, or it's the root of all evil. So you can see there's a lot of stories, myths, and beliefs around money. And what we want to do today is normalize that discussion and encourage you, your spouse, your children to all talk about money and have really positive conversations about it. So let's talk about your backgrounds first, ladies. Amelia, can you tell me if you had certain beliefs about money growing up, and was this something your parents discussed with you?
Yeah, I really like this question because definitely I liked reflecting on what I thought about money when I was younger. Specifically, I remember once I heard a radio contest to win $100. And I was just like, whoa, if I won $100. But my parents didn't really talk about money that much with me. And so a lot of the money choices that I made as a young person was kind of building as I go and figuring it out as I go. So it wasn't a taboo topic in our family, but I would say it just wasn't something that came up that much. And as a result, I feel looking back, like there were a lot of lessons I learned later in life that I wish I had been learning at the time I first started interacting with money.
Great, thank you. Well, how about you, Jen?
Very, very similar. I grew up in a huge family. So really the only time I heard money talked about was, in relation to struggling to pay bills and that kind of thing. So it taught me, at first I was, set out and determined to make a better future for myself and give my family a better start. But struggling isn't all bad. For me, it taught me to appreciate the little things, to be content, to not take things for granted. But it also teaches you empathy too. So, looking at other people and their struggles, you really actually understand where they're coming from. And, it's always been my goal to never forget where I came from.
Oh, wonderful answers. I feel like a lot of people watching this will resonate. We didn't talk about it much. I did learn how to save and do things on the cheap and eat leftovers and hit the back of the store for the clearance rack versus the front, So there were a lot of lessons in how to not spend too much and how to make sure you really wanted something before you bought it, or to turn off the lights when you left your room. But as far as like accumulating wealth or investing, it was just nothing we really talked about. So there was a lot of save and don't spend, but that's where it stopped. And that's part of the conversation, but it's not the whole picture. So hopefully today we'll give some really great conversation starters so that those watching can have discussions with their families. So thanks for sharing both of those with me. So let's talk about military families in particular. Jen, your intro just said it all. So I know you're very familiar with the lifestyle and you're familiar with a lot of the challenges that military families, especially military spouses, face. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that can impact their finances?
Yeah, definitely. So, a couple of the biggest struggles that military spouses face when it comes to personal finances is related to frequent moves and challenges related to employment, whether that's, sustaining employment because of the moves or, just moving to a place that there is no employment. It's like an employment desert and, struggling with your resume. Sometimes I say it looks like Swiss cheese because, there's holes and gaps where you've had to volunteer or you've lived overseas and because of status of forces agreements with host countries, maybe you can't work, or there's just more barriers to employment. So definitely employment is, really challenging, and that's kind of the basis of a military spouse's personal finances, right? Frequent moves can add up as well in themselves. Our friends over at Military Family Advisory Network found in one of their surveys that on average, military families are out of pocket about $1,900 per move. So if you're thinking about that every 2 to 3 years, that's a lot of money potentially that the family's out. So also, with unemployment, we hear that a lot, but unemployment rate before the pandemic for military spouses was 22%, which is crazy high. And we know the pandemic only made that worse nationwide. And National Military Family Association surveyed some of the spouses that we help out with scholarships. So we surveyed about 4,000 military spouses and found that those who were employed before the pandemic, about 38% of them lost their job because of the pandemic. So that's on top of that 22%. So that's pretty high. We know that the unemployment rate has just soared because of the pandemic. So that is an ongoing challenge to tackle. And to combat this, I mentioned that frequent moves a lot of times, make it hard and challenging for military spouses to maintain employment. So to combat that, sometimes military spouses will geo-batch or live, in a separate location from their service member, especially if the service member goes overseas or something like that. I know I did this for the last 4 years. We geo-batched. Just so, so that I can maintain employment, but, just looking at the long-term financial picture of what that stable income provides, it's not, not for the faint of heart. Supporting 2 households is very difficult financially in the short term, but the long term, toward retirement and that stability in your career progression is really important for some military spouses. Also, another challenge is access to affordable childcare. We know that has gotten harder and worse, even nationwide, but military families have always struggled to secure childcare, and it goes hand in hand with employment. You have to have, if you have little kids at home, you have to have childcare in order to go for an interview, even to go to appointments and things like that. And if you don't live close to family or you don't have any friends in the area that you're living, it's really tough. So childcare is something. And then long-term challenges, I mentioned a little bit related to retirement, but retirement is a big deal for military spouse personal finances, and lack of contribution to Social Security if you haven't been employed. That's another tough long-term challenge that military spouses face. So one way that military spouses can maybe advocate for themselves or employers can help is through remote work opportunities. allowing military spouses to remote work. Look at the pandemic. Most of us remote worked that maybe didn't remote work before. So we know it can happen. We can do it. We're creative and we make it work and we still get work done. But one of the ways that spouses struggle with retirement is being vested in their employer-based retirement account. So if you're lucky enough to be employed and you're lucky enough to have an employer who offers employment-based retirement accounts, and you contribute and they match your contributions, if you have to leave that employer before you're fully vested, you may lose out on the employer match contributions. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. So remote opportunities help with that because it keeps the spouse working with that employer longer, and maybe they can become fully vested and get those contributions. And then another thing I would just mention is, military spouses need to, or they should really consider individual retirement accounts or IRAs. Working with your financial institution and setting that up. If you already have employer-based retirement, awesome. This is just a cherry on top. But if you don't, this helps kind of fill that gap, and then you're contributing to your long-term goals.
Excellent. I love how I said, can you tell me the challenges military spouses face? That could be an entire chat in itself. Gosh, thank you to all the spouses. I myself was one for 7.5 years. And when I became one, I left the working world, and it was weird because I had been working. I started babysitting at age 12, and then I got a job at a grocery store at 17. So I'd worked for years, and then all of a sudden to not have my own income, not feel like I was financially contributing, like that took a strange emotional toll. But I did make a point to contribute to my personal IRA that I started. I had one from an employer. When I left the employer, I went online and created one. And I remember being at play dates with other military spouses when our babies were in diapers, and they didn't realize they could have their own retirement account outside of an employer. So I thought, more people should know about this option. And of course, I wasn't contributing as much during those years as I did when I worked. So that is going to affect me later when I retire, just thinking I've had this gap where I was a stay-at-home mom for quite a while. So now I'm working to aggressively contribute just so I'll be set, because I know that's going to, once upon a time that felt like it was so far in the distance, but not so much now. But I definitely agree with what you said about remote work. I've been doing that as well, and virtually schooling 2 kids. I was furloughed last year and had 6 months of unemployment. So I have gone through all of it as well. And it's such a relief to be here now with Military Saves, and I'm able to learn so much more about finances. And I feel like I've just saved so much just from being here because it's affected my mindset. So we're hoping to pass that along to you all as well. Amelia, thank you for being so patient. I'd love to ask you some more questions as well. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of spouses having their own savings, having their own retirement accounts, and what's the best way to make that happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, every couple has a different approach to finances, probably some of them healthier than others. And then obviously there's different structures to a couple's financial life that are going to be different based on the personality and needs and, skills of the couple. But I think that really thinking today about the context of Save as a Family, and also really keeping in the forefront of our minds a lot of those challenges that Jen just mentioned, it makes it uniquely important for military spouses to have some form of their own savings, and particularly retirement as well. And, the reason for that is, again, like you said, Jackie, we could talk about that for a day, but thinking about a lot of those barriers that Jen just laid out for us, all of those are arguments for why military spouses should have their own savings. And in addition to that, I would say, thinking about saving as a family, you also want to think about the fact that our children are learning from us. And what I always try to remind parents is, if you're not talking about them with money, that is also a model, right? Like, just because you're not talking with them about it doesn't mean they don't know anything. It means they're learning and absorbing that that money isn't something that's talked about, or that it's not something that's addressed, or it's this, who knows what they think about it because we're not talking about it. And so when you think about modeling for your children, feeling confident, feeling autonomous, feeling independent with their own finances, having your own savings account is important. So both parents can be delivering those messages. And then, like Jen said, with the moves, with the instability, with the challenges that come from serving our country or being married to someone serving our country, there are economic implications there. And so having that savings account, I would say, remember the mantra, start small and think big. You don't have to be saving $1,000 a month, right? It's not this big, huge thing. Just start small and think big. And by doing that, you're building some safety for yourself. And if nothing else, you're building and modeling something that you're going to want your children to be practicing.
Perfect. Start small and think big. I love that. It's like they say, how do you eat an elephant? And it's one bite at a time. It's not all at once. So that's wonderful advice. Thank you, Amelia. So Jim, what would you recommend for military spouses? Do you have any resources if they're looking for employment? What should they look for?
Yeah, for sure. If they're looking for employment, one of the first places that I would advise military spouses to look is Military One Source. So they offer a variety of assistance from, resume writing to career coaching, interview prep, those kinds of things to help you land that job you want to land. But also, spouses should start or update their profile in the Military Spouse Employment Partnership portal. It's always good to have your information up to date, whether it be, what job you're looking for, what career field, your location, your education, any certifications, that kind of stuff. On the other side of that portal, basically, if you think of it as something in between, which is DoD, there's 500 organizations that are part of the Military Spouse Employment Partnership who are dedicated to hiring military spouses and just looking for that perfect match. So definitely go in there, update that, or start a profile in that portal. Keep an eye on USA Jobs. That's another great place to look for jobs. Federal jobs a lot of times are in and around military installations. So that kind of makes it a good fit for some spouses when it comes to moving around. Remember to utilize spouse hiring preference. That is not a permanent thing. It expires in 2023, but it's just something to keep in mind to utilize, and hopefully before 2023, we'll get that renewed. Other things to consider are fellowships. Hiring Our Heroes has a military fellowship program that is pretty amazing. What we have realized is that anytime there's economic downturn or you struggle to find employment, a lot of times you end up going back to school. So to make yourself more, attractive, or just work on that master's degree or that certification, whatever. So a lot of times military spouses are highly educated, but they don't have a ton of experience. So if you're kind of looking to make a change in a career field, or you've been out of the workforce for a while, maybe look at a fellowship opportunity. Again, Hiring Our Heroes has a really great placement rate. I believe it's in the 80% range, which is amazing. They have paid, fellowships, and they make sure that the employer who you're fellowshipping with has an opening. So that helps as well. Seasonal employment's another thing to consider. Not everybody wants to work full-time all the time. So seasonal employment can help with just a little bit of spending money or to boost that savings. And then entrepreneurship is a big way that military spouses earn a living. Keep in mind, National Military Family Association has a scholarship program that funds can be utilized for spouse-owned business expenses. So if you are going to go that route, just know you're not alone. There's military and veteran service organizations that, stand behind you and can help out with scholarships and different grants and things like that to help you get on your way.
Oh, perfect. Those are such wonderful resources. Thank you, Jen. And that's a great way to bring in money. And, as I say, if you want to accumulate money, you can either earn more or spend less. It's kind of like when you're with diet or nutrition and working out. You can do just one or the other, or you can combine the two and have stronger, faster results. It's the same with money. So that's a great way to bring in more income. So, Amelia, I'm going to ask you, if families are looking to maybe cut back on their spending or expenditures, what advice would you like to give them?
I would say, first of all, go easy on yourself. It can be really tempting to kind of just batten down the hatches and cut everything off. But what you want to do is remember this: savings is a habit, not a destination. And what that means is that you want to make it as easy as possible for yourself to save over the long run. It's not about saving one time this amount of money. It's about building that habit and that practice into your life. So if we're talking about cutting down expenditures, choose just one thing to cut out at first, something approachable. Maybe you drop down a membership level and you don't eliminate it altogether. Or maybe, you choose one streaming service instead of, having the holy grail of all of the streaming services. But by starting small like that, you're creating something that's actually more sustainable. And that's what goes to building that habit. Because what we see a lot is on both sides, both in saving more and in cutting back those expenditures, we see folks be really enthusiastic and excited, but what they're setting up for themselves is unsustainable. And so then when it becomes unsustainable, it stops. So what you want to be focusing on is not, what's the maximum amount I can squeeze out of, my monthly budget. Instead, you want to think about, what can I sustain? What little changes can I introduce this month? Maybe next month I'll introduce another one. So it's not specific. I'm sorry about that, but I really do think that sometimes we get so focused with savings on trying to create this really scarce environment for ourselves. And again, like diet and nutrition, it's not sustainable. When you take out all of the things you like to eat, you're never going to maintain that diet. So use the same philosophy for cutting down on your expenditures.
Perfect. So gradual, make it small changes that become habits and become part of your daily, whether it's automatic transfers into your account, or maybe saying, I liked the going down to a different membership level, or maybe only eating out a certain time of, certain times of the month versus, 3 times a week. So little changes like that will add up. So thank you, Amelia. That's really great. So as I said, as I was a military spouse, I've also experienced the frequent moves, being the only one holding down the home front, unemployment, virtual schooling, all of these things. And I have wanted to not pass down a scarcity mindset to my children. I didn't want them to worry about not having enough money or this and that. And the pandemic for them was very scary. Adults don't really have control. So of course, children experiencing this really don't know what's going on. So I think it's really important to kind of talk about the emotional component that affects the families. So Jen, I know you helped military families who've dealt with some really serious issues, including unemployment, but especially food insecurity. And you're doing what you can to help them improve their financial literacy. So what advice would you give to military couples who've struggled with money or are currently struggling right now? And how do you convey healthy discussions with your children so it's not adding to the panic?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think my number one piece of advice is to don't be afraid or ashamed to ask for help. There's a lot of stigma related to struggling, whether you're struggling with food, making ends meet, or struggling with food insecurity, as you mentioned. And that happens, we see that a lot in junior ranking families. So just know that you're not alone. And don't be ashamed. There's tons of organizations out there that are happy to help. Military Family Advisory Network, I mentioned them earlier. They're committed to providing 1 million meals to military families in need. They just started that. They announced that challenge last week. So they're going to be going around the country to different military installations to help, like just really help and be there for military families and set them up with resources that are available to them. And then Military One Source, I mentioned Military One Source before as well. They offer financial counseling. So if you're just struggling to make ends meet, I mean, sometimes it's literally there's just not enough money. You're managing the best that you can, but it's like a puzzle and you can't, you just can't seem to make it work. So there are financial counselors there. You mentioned the emotional, component of all of that. There's definitely an emotional part of struggling, and just making ends meet. Military One Source also has military family life counselors. So you can get on the same page, and have kind of somebody in between, if you and your spouse are not seeing eye to eye, or if it's just, just sometimes you end up arguing a lot when you're struggling, because it's just a tough situation. So MFLACs are there to help as well. And then secondly, remember that these challenging situations related to the military lifestyle are always temporary, right? So whether it's you're at a location that's an unemployment or employment desert, or you're stationed overseas, or something like that, even rank, if you're junior ranking family, just realize eventually a promotion is coming. You're not always going to be there. Start thinking about that, focus on the positives of where you want to go. And things like deployment, where that kind of brings in more money and then you go with less money and you're trying to make it, stretch. Again, help us on the way. It's not always going to be that way. So just look forward and teach your kids how to be kind of resilient in these situations and model that good behavior, whether it's getting financial counseling or, military family life counseling, whatever it takes. They're watching, as Amelia was saying, they're watching and they're seeing how you're handling these situations.
Very good advice. And I would like to add to that, don't be afraid to ask. I remember there were times I would hear about programs and I thought, oh, we're not going to qualify. And guess what we did? When we were stationed in Germany, we ended up with WIC overseas, and I had 2 kids under 2, and we ended up with so much food, and it was so helpful to reduce that grocery bill. And then when my children started school in Maryland, their entire school sent home free and reduced lunch paperwork for everyone to sign. And again, I thought, oh, we're not going to qualify. We did. So, don't just say no without trying, and don't be afraid to ask. And maybe even ask some of your friends on base. You'll find out they're taking advantage of these programs as well, and they really do add up. So thank you for all those resources. I really appreciate it. So Amelia, you manage the America Saves for Young Workers, and I'd like to talk about the children from your perspective as well. How young do you advise we start talking to them about money, and what are some ways we can facilitate those conversations?
I would say, and I feel like we're setting all of the parents up for kind of a tightrope on the call today. So I'm sorry, I'm about to do that again. But I would say start really young. I mean, frankly, like with elementary school children, you can use that as an opportunity to practice basic math skills, just fun little, activities at the grocery store, if they're getting a treat or something like that. And that's helpful too, because what that does is it keeps the other balance of the only time you're not talking to them or about money, or just about money generally around them, is in a negative context. And we want to shield our children from those stresses. Jen, definitely highlighted how delicate this can be. And we're sympathetic to that. We definitely understand it's a difficult time. It can cause tension between partners, but we don't want that to be the only time that children are talking or hearing about money. Because if it is, then before they even have their own experiences with money, they're learning it as this stressful, like probably ideally avoided topic. So start early, make it fun, make it about math, make it neutral. and just involve them in those conversations. And then as they're getting older, once they start earning, I would say then start to kind of expand those to be more about their financial life. So money in the beginning can just be numbers. And that's a really approachable place for families to start, because then it doesn't pull in that emotional context, right? Like if we're just talking about buying a pack of gum and counting change, we're talking about money, we're understanding costs, we're understanding, that money doesn't grow on trees, but we're also not teaching them from that early age, like, oh no, this is bad, or this is something scary, or this is a tense conversation.
I love that. So make it approachable and just normalize it and sprinkle it in throughout everyday conversations without making it this big, high pressure conversation. I recently shared a video from a veteran who, her name's Annette Harris, and she even said, have your kids play Monopoly and, talk about the money with that. And I thought that's fun. It's a game. And I've given mine before, like we'll go to $3. I'll give them $3, take them to the Dollar Tree, and they have to think about how they want to spend their own money, and watching them make these decisions of, well, I only have this much. Do I really want it or do I not? And it's just a fun way to get them thinking about spending and maybe not being impulsive about it. We also talk about saving up for purchases as well, because I would love to help them avoid debt in the future as much as possible. Where you're not just buying something on the fly on a credit card that you're now paying interest on, but if you know you want it and you give yourself a little bit of time, that's something that I'm working to instill as well. So these are really great casual ways to talk to your kids about money. So let's talk about teenagers. You kind of alluded to teenagers working, and before we do that, I was wondering, did either of you work as teenagers? And I'm curious as to what you did, if so. How about you, Jen?
So I didn't work during high school, but I worked right after high school. Was at McDonald's, saved up money to put down on a car, and shortly thereafter joined the Air Force. So, just looking for that stable income, access to higher education, and those kinds of things. But McDonald's it was.
And then you served our country, and you probably thought, I have real money now. I can't imagine that jump in pay. That's exciting. How about you, Amelia?
I did. I started working when I was 13 years old. I argued my way into working for a summer camp that had a really strict policy against hiring, I think like under 16, maybe. And I volunteered for them for a summer, and then I made a compelling case why I should be hired. So I was very work oriented from a young age. And I worked over the summers then until I was a junior or maybe a sophomore in high school. And then when I was a sophomore in high school, I think I got my first also during the week, during the school year job. So yeah, I got my 40 quarters of Social Security, I think, when I was like 27 years old.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I started at 12 babysitting, and it was $1 per hour. This was the early 90s. But I saved it. And then I would pet sit, of course, so anything I can do. And then once I turned 17, I got a job bagging groceries. And I ended up working at that grocery store for 5.5 years. And I want to kick myself now for not getting the 401k, because they had it advertised by the time clock. But as a 17-year-old, I punch in and be like, And now I think, oh, that could have accrued so much interest by now. But no one had talked to me about it. But I will say the one good thing my parents did back then is they said, well, we've decided whatever you save up for a car, we're going to match that. And I thought, oh, that's awesome. So I saved up $1,250, bought a $2,500 used 87 Oldsmobile. It was this huge car, but I was so proud of it because I paid for it. And my parents taught me about that long-term savings, because I saved for a few years. And anyway, I think it's pretty awesome. So I love that we all had some experience. So Amelia, when teens do start earning money, how do you talk to them about making responsible choices and not just spending it impulsively? What would you recommend they do with some of their earnings?
Definitely. So I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but again, start small and think big. One thing that I do see with some of our teens saving is that they're so excited to start saving that they're putting 90% of their paycheck into savings account. And again, that's not sustainable. And also right now it's waived, but generally you're only allowed to make 6 transactions on your savings account a month. So you really don't want to be putting yourself in a position where you're saving too aggressively and you have to be tapping into that more than you're supposed to. The other thing I would say with impulse spending with teenagers, and this is hard for a lot of adults to stomach, but until 2019, our #1 nationally selected savings goal for the teens that we were helping to save was clothing and shoes. And that was really frustrating for a lot of the adults in and around these youths and teens' lives. But what I say to them, and I say to you today, is that's okay. Just take a deep breath. Teens are going to teen. It's fine. But remember that what we're trying to do, again, is build a habit. Savings is a habit, not a destination. And so with teens, if we're encouraging them to save, like Jackie, you said, it had that sign next to your time clock, but you didn't pay any attention to it. We definitely need all of the adults in teens' lives pushing saving every second leading up to that employment. So then when they're earning for the first time, they're thinking about saving for the first time, and that's building a learned behavior. With adults, we work with changing behaviors, but with teens, they can just learn it from the beginning. They don't know that everybody's not saving a portion of their pay. So start with that habit. And then the other thing that I would say to prevent that impulse spending is that as they're building that habit, as they're saving, as they're resisting the temptation to spend, let them spend that savings. It's okay. If they spend it all, that's their prerogative. But what they've done is they've both practiced the habit, and now they've had a positive reward as a result of those behaviors. And that's what we're trying to do with teens. Okay, if you're going to start saving for your retirement as a teenager, good for you. Bless your heart. You're the only one. We can't get 30-year-olds to save for retirement. So good for you. But if most teens aren't going to do that, and that's okay. We need to embrace them where they are. And so let them experience the positive rewards of that savings habit. Don't judge the purchases. Let them learn that when they save, they get the good and fun things that they want. And then as they get older, we can develop maybe spending that savings on a little bit, more necessary items.
Oh, perfect. I really appreciate that. And I'm sure if we're also modeling the good behaviors, that's going to help affect them as well positively. So don't be overly controlling. Do let them learn a little on their own. But if you can get them to put a little in retirement, I still wish someone would have told me that, but that's okay. I'm on it now. So Jen, what you've talked about spouses and their difficulties in finding employment. What about the teenagers now who are moving around from duty station to duty station every few years? What do you recommend they do if they're looking to find work?
So you mentioned a couple of that I was thinking about, babysitting and dog sitting or pet sitting. Those are like 2 evergreen issues or things that teens can do that every military family is dying to have a babysitter or to have a dog sitter or somebody to take care of their pet while they travel. So definitely babysitting, pet sitting are things. Dog walking, it's another good way to just kind of get out and get some fresh air and help out your community. Mowing, snow shoveling, things like that. That's a great way to kind of instill community service in a way, just like looking out for your neighbor and doing something nice to help them out, and also making a quick buck on the side. So just that's a good way to kind of get started. And then you were talking, Jackie, about working for a grocer. So in your new community where you move to, just look at different restaurants, different grocery stores, convenience stores, things like that. My son's in Taekwondo, and so I always tell him, like, when you're a black belt, maybe you can teach, you can help teach the kids or, help out with camp and things like that. So, just thinking like that, there are several different little ways that teens can get involved and help out their local community and make a buck at the same time.
Perfect. And those are skills you can take with you to any duty station because those are all needs that are going to exist. So let's talk a little bit about marriage. We haven't talked about that. We've talked about the spouses, we've talked about the children, and I'm interested in both of your thoughts. So what advice do you have for couples who might be different, where one's a saver and one's a spender, or maybe where one isn't being honest about purchases, or there's not a lot of transparency with bank accounts? Um, how would you navigate that, or what would you recommend they do? How would they talk? What resources do they look for? I'll go ahead and start with you, Amelia.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer this question, but I think, I mean, what you just described are really different dynamics. And I think it would be important for the folks joining us today for this midday money chat to have an honest look at which one of those categories you fall into, because a lot of times, whichever one it is, I think we're sometimes tempted to categorize it as the other. So if you and your spouse just have really different spending habits, if we've got a spender, if we've got a saver, if we've got a money stressor and we've got a money ostrich, you just like to stick your head in the sand and not think about it. Those are just different behaviors. And so while it can be extremely frustrating and feel very like you want to, strangle your spouse in those moments, I think it's important to take a step back and to actually have a conversation about those different views, and then to group problem solve. How are we going to use both of our habits to both of our best abilities? Because if you've got a saver, you don't want them making everything in your life harder, or every device that you buy breaks because you're always buying the cheapest one, right? So find the little ways that you can acknowledge both of your strengths with both of those habits, and how you can combine them to have healthy financial behaviors. And talking about this too goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of today, with just talking about money, that talking about finances is a healthy behavior. For those folks who are in that category, and also I would say it's important to remember that just because you two have different inclinations doesn't mean that either one of you are being malicious towards the other. For folks who have partners who are being dishonest or not transparent, that's a really different issue. And I'm not sure I really have savings advice for that, but I think that what I would like to contextualize is that when we have such different habits from our partners, it's really tempting to interpret that as rude or disrespectful, or, like, why doesn't this person care about me? And the fact is, you just have different inclinations. And so avoid that temptation to categorize yourself in perhaps this more problematic camp, if it's just a different of approaches. And then if your spouse isn't being honest with you, honestly, that's why it's even more important for spouses to have their own savings account, because in that case, if the only way to get transparency is to have control over it, then you need to be building that into your opportunities and your financial health.
Great. Thank you, Amelia. How about you, Jen? What would you recommend?
Wow, that's amazing. Everything Amelia said. So take that, and then just, I would just add to it, if you're having trouble having those conversations, or somebody is dishonest, again, military family life counselors are there for military families to just kind of help you work through some of that and meet you where you are. So that's a good place to, have that conversation and just try to figure out where to go with that. But everything that Amelia said, just because you might, if it's not malicious, and you have different spending habits, they're just different, so look for ways that you can work that into your advantage, both of your advantage, your family's advantage. One thing that we do as a family is with each PCS, we set up a goal. Like, what do we want to do this 2 to 3 years that we're here? Whether it's a savings goal, or getting out of debt, or, this project on our house, whatever, just kind of setting those goals, and, it helps the saver and it helps the spender, so just kind of finding those ways that you both can be involved, to accomplish your goals.
Perfect. Well, and you both hit some really good points, and I can add a couple to those. I know that my colleague Lila, who's also a veteran and mill spouse, and she's an accredited financial counselor, said she and her husband both have their own discretionary accounts. So they each have the one that's their joint, but then they have kind of their own fund money that they're allowed to, spend, which is one solution. I've talked to other couples too who have a certain dollar amount. Like if the purchase is above $100, they have to talk about it first, or three, or whatever your financial status that you're comfortable with. And then smaller things, if it's okay, if you're okay with that and comfortable and trusting, then that's a start. But also, as you said earlier, counseling is a good option with the MFLAC, with Military One Source. We also have a partnership with the Yellow Ribbon Network that provides free financial counseling and coaching. And as our very first Midday Money guest said, Michael Thomas, he said, always get help before you really need it. Like go in proactively, have those conversations before it's a problem. So that's what I would recommend, especially if you're a younger spouse and your spouse is working. I've had friends who feel like, well, he's the earner, so his job is the money, and I don't really know what's happening, where it's, what's coming, where it's going. Make sure you talk about it because you are a couple, and this is a very important conversation to have. But also, again, great reason to have your own, just for that peace of mind. So, all right, well, I realize we're getting pretty low on time here. So let's see. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and start wrapping this up. But before we do, I would like to ask if either of you have anything else that you'd like to add to the conversation that we weren't able to share. I'll go ahead and start with you, Jen.
So I think communication and planning are huge. I was just talking about with HPCS, we try to plan, some kind of goal, whether that's, saving up a certain amount or paying off debt, whatever. That is particularly interesting or, important as you're looking towards transitioning out of the military. So, just planning, but especially for key times. If you're looking to, expand your family or transition out of the military, those are things to, just really take seriously. Know what your income's going to look like on the other side if you're retiring. What does that actually look like? 50+% of your base pay. Take into account taxes. If you're living in a state that taxes retirement account, think about that. Prepare for jobs while you're still in, whether that be finishing up a degree or, getting that other certification, or if you have a certification due to your AFSC or MOS, your job in the military, make sure that you get a civilian equivalent. So the DoD has, and the services have programs set up to help service members make that transition. But communication and planning are huge and they can't be overstated.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jen. How about you, Amelia?
I think I would, to add to what we've already said today, the only thing I would also add for saving as a family, in the same way that we are encouraging both spouses to have their own savings account, I would say translate that to your children as well. If it's just where they're putting their babysitting money or just where they're putting their dog sitting money, that's good and important. But owning an account is we say that it's a cornerstone to financial health for young people. And so I think that just to add to everything that we've said today, by giving your young person that account, you're giving them a level of responsibility and engagement with their savings behaviors that they wouldn't otherwise have. So the piggy bank is fun. It's important. It's really fun to get to count up their money. And then at a certain point, you want to transition that into an account, both for the safety of their money, but also because that is another really important suite of behaviors that help build financial health.
Wonderful. That is very good advice. And it's important for everyone to work as a unit, but everyone to also have their own individual accounts. You can have individual goals as well as family goals. Like you said, if you're saving up for a vacation or something altogether, that's a really great way to encourage everyone to be part of the conversation and part of the mission. So I thank you both so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation and a really great way to end a very successful Military Saves Month. We've got one more live. I'll tell our audience for tomorrow. It is our event finale, and that'll be at 2 p.m. It'll be with the Military Saves team. As a reminder, before we sign off, make sure that you've commented below with your very favorite takeaway from this for a chance to win a $50 gift card of your choice from Military Families Magazine. And tomorrow is our deadline for our $500 I'm Saving For sweepstakes. So best of luck. Jen and Amelia, thank you so much for your time, your insight, your wisdom. It has been so valuable, and I've truly appreciated hosting this chat today. Thank you both.
Thank you.
All right, and to our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.